Nigeria's headline inflation returning into the negative territory in the month of September, showing 32.70% reading, up by 30 basis points on a month-on-month basis. That's on the back of rising energy costs and recent floods in some parts of the country. The latest inflation comes just as top policymakers, think tank economists, and others are meeting in Abuja for the annual economic summit. Johnson Chukwu is an investment market professional and the group CEO at Cowrie Asset Management and is in Abuja tonight in our studios. We thank you for making the show tonight. Welcome to Arise News, and this is Arise Exchange.
Thank you, Bossy, for having me. Good evening.
It's good to have you. Let's start with the conference you're attending, the Economic Summit Group event. This is the second day. What has been the key takeaways for you as an investment professional?
Well, Boston, I think the key takeaway is coming from the presentation that was made by the World Bank Vice President that spoke yesterday, and one of which is that, in terms of policy direction, that the policy direction seemed to be appropriate, but it's going to take a much longer time than most people are expecting to have the full impact of the current policy reforms. And I remember when he made the statement that we should expect about 10 to 15 years for the full positive impact of the current policy reform to be manifest or to take the full benefit of it. A lot of Nigerians actually hissed, and he asked if the hissing was an indication of approval or a disapproval. But the basic thing we have to do is that, for me, is that in as much as we have taken this policy direction, we need to do a lot more things to make sure that the time it will take for it to bear fruit or for it to achieve the desired objective is shorter. Because I'm sure Nigerians cannot deal with the current cost of living crisis for another 10, 15 years. But there are a couple of things we need to do. Like my session this afternoon, we dwelt, of course, this morning, we dwelt on some of the issues we need to focus on. What should the monetary policy authorities do to not just achieve price stability, but also achieve growth? And we talked about the transmission channels that has to be improved, the fact that we also need to take full advantage of the deregulation of the FX market as well as the deregulation of the downstream sector, by ensuring that we make the economy productive, which is the core of the issue. This economy must be productive. We need to focus on those sectors that we can fast-track its productivity. We need to make sure that the economy is fully integrated in the global economic space. We need to make sure that we adopt artificial intelligence, digital technologies, so that we can actually compete in these spaces just like other countries are doing today.
So what do you make of the September inflation data turning negative 32.7% as we saw today? Well, what are the key issues in this for Nigeria's policymakers?
No, interestingly, Boston, when the figures came out this morning, I guess most economic analysts had predicted that. Yesterday, I granted 2 interviews that I said that by the time the CPI is published by Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, they're going to see a reversal of the 2 months gain we saw in inflation figure in July and August. And the simple reason is we saw a material increase in energy costs. You had made allusion to the fact that there was flooding in some parts of the country that affected food production. What we will have to observe that the major driver of inflation in the country have been the volatile item, the food and energy costs. Those are the 2 major drivers of energy inflation in the country. If you look at year-on-year inflation figure for the month of September, you observe that food and non-alcoholic beverages increased by almost 17%, I think 16.9% in between September this year and September last year. So that was the greatest propeller of all-item inflation. So we had expected that. And if you look at, we are seeing a divergent movement between core inflation and all-item inflation, because all-item inflation is driven by food and energy costs. In the past 3 months, we've seen, in the month of July, for instance, we saw a decline in core inflation to about 27.48%. And then last month, in August, you saw an increase in core inflation to 27.58%. And now we're dealing with a decline in core inflation to 27.43%. Whereas in all those 3 months, we saw a different movement in all-item inflation. First 2 months, we saw a decline.
What was responsible for that?
Inflation.
What's responsible for that?
What I'm just emphasizing that, yeah, the core factor that driving that is that we're dealing with one. In the first case of food, we saw the harvest season positively affect the food inflation in first 2 months, immediate past 2 months before September. But that changed in September because of disruption, because the core food we produce are basically crop production. So anything that disrupts crop production, which is all further highlighted by the factor that drive food inflation, will affect immediately food inflation figures. Well, as core inflation, if you disaggregate food inflation and energy cost from all-item inflation, when you deal with core inflation, you observe that had went up to past 2 months and went down this month. And why did it go down this month? Because we did not see a material shift in exchange rate between September this year and September last year. So the change in exchange rate was not as drastic as it was the previous 2 months. So what we have to bear in mind that factors driving inflation in the country are energy costs, food items, as well as the transmission effects of exchange rate movement. So if you keep exchange rate stable, you're going to deal with a stable core inflation rate if you don't see an improvement. But you need to deal with the issue of food production and also deal with the issue of energy cost. So those are the major factors driving inflation in the country. And once we saw that movement in disruption in food production and saw the movement in energy cost as a result of changing fuel prices, once you expected that we're going to see an increase in all-item inflation in the month of September.
So that's reading the inflation tea leaves in a manner of speaking. But how does this stubborn inflation play into other macro indices that go into growth outlook? Of course, you take exchange rate, interest rate. How do all of this go into outlook for growth, investment expectations, whether they're domestic or foreign, and so on?
Well, it depends on how the monetary authorities respond to this reversal of the decline we saw in inflation figures. Because the reversal was not just on all-item inflation, month-on-month inflation. We also saw a reversal. We also saw a month-on-month increase in inflation figures. Now, what would the monetary policy authorities do? Do they want to go into a major severe contraction by issuing short-term money market instruments to suck up liquidity from the economy, which they have done in the previous months? If they do that, you're going to see an increase in interest rates, and further increase in interest rate will weaken the risk sector productive activity because cost of funding would go up, and at a time when the demand is weak. So manufacturers will find it difficult to borrow at higher costs when they don't even have strong demand for their products. So the economy will weaken further, or economic growth will slow down further. So, and of course, if there's a slowdown in economic growth, you're going to see a slowdown in employment. So it depends on, like I said, how the monetary authorities respond to it. They could actually decide to wait it out and see what happens in subsequent months and see if the impact of the flooding is going to be a very temporary one and we're going to see the benefit of the harvest season.
How should the fiscal authorities respond? That's the flip side of what you just said. How should the fiscal authorities respond?
I think the fiscal authorities' response should be focused on what should we do in the medium term. And I've always emphasized this. The key challenge we have today are issues around insecurity. If we do not address the issue of insecurity, whatever gain we're even going to get from the harvest season in terms of food inflation or food prices will be dissipated once we get to the planting season. The fiscal authority should focus on addressing the issue of insecurity. And I believe that given the size of this country, given our resources, it shouldn't take us more than 1 year to deal with this nightmare of insecurity and allow farmers to go back to their farming areas and continue to cultivate crop that feed us. I think that's what we need to do. In terms of core inflation, the short-term solution will be to deal with the issue of crude oil production that will help us generate more foreign exchange earnings and help stabilize the exchange rate. If you have a more stable exchange rate or possibly some level of appreciation in the exchange rate, you are going to deal with the core inflation when you take out energy. In fact, it will also even affect positively the energy cost because part of the energy cost is because of the exchange rate depreciation.
So how will you trade the latest inflation reading? What does it mean for various asset class investors and the outlook on the rest of the year?
Ideally, one should expect that fixed income instruments become more attractive. If you expect the Monetary Authority to tighten or to come to the market and issue more fixed income instruments. And then, ordinarily, when that happens, you see a shift in equity interest in equity instruments. But we've seen some level of abnormality when it comes to, or lack of normal when it comes to movement in these asset classes, because like I've said repeatedly, we're dealing with a shadow economy that to some extent can disrupt the natural flow of economic investment when you have a huge level of shadow economy.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. We are grateful for your time and those insights as always. Thank you so much. Johnson Chukwu, investment market professional and the group CEO at Carrier Asset Management in our Abuja studios. Rice Exchange is back in a moment.